It's almost 8. The sun's on its way up. Um, I crashed halfway through eating my pizza. Um, I said I was sober, and I was, but I was tired. And now I'm a little bit dehydrated. Um, but something I wanted to point out before I went to sleep last night is that I had a little bit of a discussion at the bar about politics, as I normally would. And something that came up that seemed to um, have a little bit more of a stable response um, was the discussion of the economics of the wall that Trump is um, pondering out loud. Um, and I think that the reason why I got kind of a positive response to that was because it's not happening. Nobody's doing this. And it's really remarkable how you can have a country that is so obsessed with putting the economy ahead of everything, and then somebody comes up with this policy that has clear economic implications, and nobody analyzes it. Can you point me towards an economic analysis of Trump's wall? Because I haven't seen one. Maybe I just haven't seen it. Maybe it exists, but if it does, it's certainly not in the mainstream media. Um, so what would actually happen to the economy if Trump built a wall? Well, he's um, fighting or he's pushing the argument on the uh, idea that the the Mexicans that go back and forth over the border are um, have a heightened level of criminality um, and quote unquote steal Americans' jobs. Um, when people talk about how they quote unquote steal Americans' jobs, they seem to forget that they're doing it for less than minimum wage. It's not. It's not like Americans are competing against Mexicans on an open market. That would be the false perception of things and not how things actually are. Um, and if they were, then they would be losing, right? And then putting the wall up would be government interference into a market, um, which you would think would upset the same people that are arguing for it. What seems to be underlying it is this sort of strange idea that they're stealing good jobs. Um, and if you just put up a wall and keep them out, then Americans will get good jobs. It's amazingly ignorant of the economic reality that's there, although it is reflective of the reality that there's not a lot of economic opportunities in a lot of these areas, and the fact of the matter being that the uh, trade regimes that exist are not helping the people that live in these areas. A better idea than building a wall might be pulling out of NAFTA. Um, that's actually what people want and would actually help people get to the goals that they want to get to. Not building a wall. But what would building a wall do? What would the actual consequences of that be? I think that to realize this, you have to understand what the legal category that migrants are in the United States. Somebody who is a bit of an authority on this and that I will defer to Chomsky's daughter. I believe her name is Aviva. Although she will forever be known as Chomsky's daughter, which I'm sure is somewhat annoying. But I mean, you could have worse things happen to you. Um, but she is somewhat of an authority there, and someone to defer to. Um, the whole legal structure and basis of the way that migrants are legally interpreted in the United States is not similar to an immigrant or migrant scenario that most people are familiar with as a consequence of their own migration to this continent. I have a low battery, so I'm going to have to swap this out. Okay, I'm back. So in fact, the entire legal framework of how the American state interprets what a migrant worker is descended not from the system of European colonization and immigration, but more from what the systems of labor that those colonizers used, namely slavery. So, when we talk about migrant workers, it's kind of an abusive language. The and because it's an abusive language, it leads us to be confused as to what these people's legal status actually is. In fact, instead of talking about migrants, we should be talking about slaves, because that is the legal framework that is in place to administer the seasonal migrant workers that come back and forth over the border, and that the defense would be most effective in preventing. So, I will get a little bit more sleep. So, to talk about a fence that prevents migration is not. It's not really correct language relative to what to what an immigrant is in the United States, to what a migrant is, to what a temporary worker is, and to what a slave is. It really is more along the lines of that what Trump is talking about is abolishing slavery. And he has no understanding of that, as far as I can see. He may be, hiding something, but I see no real evidence that he at all understands what he's saying on this point. So let's talk about what would actually happen. Well, if you prevented migrant workers from coming over and working the fields, then you would have to pay native Californians to do it, or let the food rot. If the food rots, then you end up with food shortages. And if you have to pay native Californians, then now you're paying people that have rights because they're legal citizens. And the wage that you pay these people is going to double or triple to minimum wage, because the migrants who are not citizens, who are not legally people in the United States, who are protected by no labor laws, are able to work at slave labor prices, which is the point of the entire system that exists. Um, Border guards look the other way. The migrants are allowed to move back and forth over the border, and they're allowed to do that because it provides a steady stream of slave labor to the producers in California, who then exploit that slave labor in producing food for the rest of the continent. So the consequence of building a wall and preventing that flow of migrant temporary labor, of slave labor, is that the price of food would double or triple. So that's the first thing you have to realize. We're talking about what are the actual economic consequences of Trump building a wall over Mexico? Food prices will probably triple, if not more than that. So you're looking at hyperinflation in food. And go ahead, ask an economist; they'll tell you that. Um, the entire economy becomes massively altered as soon as that happens. No. I need to be clear. I'm not particularly keen on slavery. Um, it's not exactly something that I think should exist. Um, but there needs to be other solutions in place to try to address it. Creating a divide and conquer strategy between Mexicans and white Californians, or white and black Californians as it may be, is not a positive step forward. We don't need racial conflicts and ethnic wars. Um, and transferring all of the it might create jobs in the region, um, but ultimately, this is not a substantial increase of standard of living of anybody. Um, you take people out of a McDonald's and you put them in a field picking strawberries or whatever else, if you can even get them to do it. This isn't really much of a step forward. What would be a step forward would be if you could socialize the workers, um, or have them, think in more socialized terms, to build unions, and to take control, and reduce the profit margin by eliminating the management class. That's a way that this can be done that won't put the price through the roof, is eliminating management. Because ultimately the reason that that's where the dead weight is. That's where the wasteful part of the process is that you're paying a boss. And for something like this, it's not really necessary. You just need to, you put a union rep in a marketing department and oversees a bunch of trucks. It's not complicated. You pick berries out of the field, you put them in a box, and you shove them off. We don't need a management class making, upper middle class salaries on top of slave labor to do it. There's solutions that are better. Even if I acknowledge that, okay, well, if you build a wall, then yeah, more people will get paid better for work that's done. But the consequence of that is that, with the economic system that's in place right now, and things as they are, we will see an incredible increase in the price of food. I said 2 or 3 times as much. That might be underestimating. Okay, so and then if we're lucky, that spurs innovation towards other options. So you might see more greenhouse growing, um, which then you end up with demand going down in the region, and then you end up with people without jobs again. So it's um, there's really no way to conclude that this is a positive for the economy in the region, even if you acknowledge the status quo is pretty shitty. Um, changing the status quo might be a good idea, but this is this is not the way to do it. Um, and if you look at some of Trump's other plans, um, like his flat tax plan is ridiculous. Um, you're just gonna end up with like the country's gonna be bankrupt, right? So I mean that's two immediate consequences of Trump's policies. You're looking at the country is going. Um, the country can't go broke. I mean that doesn't make sense, right? But um, um, it can um, suffer very large deficits, and that can have an effect on its currency, on its credit rating, and these sorts of things, right? So, um, those are two immediate consequences of his policies. The first one is that he won't generate enough tax revenue and then he says he wants to spend money in the military, right? So it's just start banging your head against the wall, right? You're gonna slash taxes and increase military spending. Are there any? Is there any money left for people? Um, well, don't even ask that question. Of course, there's not. You know, maybe they can make a few dollars digging their own graves. Um, there's that, and there's the actual very concrete, very easy to understand, and like I said, ask any economist; they will uphold this. Very stark truth that if he builds that wall, you're going to be paying 3 times as much for food, at least. So that's something to think about as you're pulling the lever, or dumping your finger in the ink, or simply marking an X on a ballot. Um, I'm not sure how things are done uh, in your country anymore, but um, as a Canadian, I'll certainly feel the price change as well. On top of the dollar up here going down, that could be catastrophic for us. We would have to really take a good look at this idea of food security, um, which again is probably a net positive, but the short-term implications are just very, very dramatic. And something that, if you plan on being poor for the next 4 or 5 years, you might want to take note of before you vote for this guy.